Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, actually, Lumpur Pasano was quite compassionate. I think he gave me at least 5 days, if not a whole week's notice, that I'd be probably giving the talk tonight. I always think it's a cruel thing to do after someone hasn't really spoken in 2 weeks, to then ask them to give a Dhamma talk. We have before these new moon and full moon observation days, we have a meeting up in the top of the hill, and kind of just the monks or the lay people get together and kind of share. So I've had a little bit of speaking, but I remember the first night I could hardly even, just a whole sentence, like my throat was so kind of sore just after not speaking. So I think what obviously comes up for me for the past 2 weeks is retreat, being on retreat, either kind of like here, the whole community of long-term residents and people who ordained during the kind of, we call this the Vassa, the rains retreat in Southeast Asia. And so we follow the rules for the Pansa. Like in Thailand, oftentimes the communities will kind of be closed to guests, and the monastic community will be doing a pretty intense retreat. Still do the alms rounds usually, but group sittings most of the day, and Dhamma talks almost every night. At least when I was living there, that's kind of the schedule. But of course here we can't do that just because it's summer's the busiest time of year for us with guests and works projects. And so our kind of the equivalent of Vassa is the winter retreat. But we still try to have the opportunity for people to go on retreat during the Vassa. It's one period where we take more time studying the rules. So any of the guests who are staying here, you notice the nights when there isn't evening puja, it's the communities up in the hill studying the rules, and so that happens during the Vassa. But also, all of us get an individual period of time, usually 2 weeks, to be on retreat, to set down our duties that we would normally be doing, say be the kitchen manager, the water monk, or guest monk, or just whatever responsibilities, even kind of morning chore period, the sort of the half hour before breakfast, all those sort of duties are set aside just to give us that time to be in solitude. And it's a unique period of time. Like I say, we do have the rains retreat for us, the January, February, March, and oftentimes Ajahn Jotipalo or some of the other teachers, especially visiting teachers, come through, and they might be leading retreats, and oftentimes we get the opportunity to go and sit with them on those retreats. But all those kinds of retreats, they're group retreats, and so you're with other people. And interestingly enough, for the monastics that attend like all of these retreats, we still have duties and responsibilities. We're looking after the other senior monks, or taking care of our alms bowls, and there are even responsibilities while being on those group retreats. So this solitary retreat is unique in the sense that, yeah, you can set down all of that and basically just have to look after yourself, look after your own mind, look after your own retreat. And it just kind of dawned on me that, well, it was actually, for myself, even though it was sort of a solitary individual retreat, I still had some duties and responsibilities, so I had to interact a few times with Lumpur Pasano. And I think it was like day 3 or 4 even, he asked me, he said, so are you settling into your retreat? And I remember it seemed like an extremely odd question to me, just when he initially asked that. And I was kind of like settling in, it's like it took me like 5 minutes. It was like, I'm not really a skilled meditator, but I actually have been sitting retreats for about, over 20 years. And so now it's like when I get the opportunity, it's just, partly just by the lifestyle that we live. It's like, living in the monastery, I had this insight actually quite early on. I was on the retreat staff at the Insight Meditation Society, and before I joined the staff there, I used to sit a lot of retreats, especially Goenka retreats, and I always remember that it took a few days to sort of settle into those retreats, if not even like half the retreat, before the mind would really settle down, and I really felt like I was benefiting from the meditations and not struggling or being overwhelmed with just thoughts and emotions. Then when I joined the staff at IMS, I could work my schedule that if there was a teacher that was teaching, I could usually work it out with the other people on the staff that I was working in, that I could like work 5 or 6 days straight, and then I could have a period of like 4 or 5 days off right in a row. And so I could sit with many of the various teachers. And I noticed when I was there, just by trial and error, but just paying attention, that I noticed when I was those 4 or 5 day retreats, 4-day retreats, that it would be like the morning period with my mind would be that way, and then the afternoon my mind would settle, and I'd get 2 or 3 days of quote unquote good practice, and then I'd notice like the last half of the day the day that I was going to end, my mind would kick in again and start thinking about planning what I'd have to do when I start working. And it dawned on me that happened because like you lived in the retreat center where you were on retreat, so it was just so much about life I didn't have to negotiate, have to worry about, like just driving to the retreat or living in community. Like I was part of the maintenance staff, so there were other people that were cooking, there were other people that were cleaning, there were other people that were doing the office work, and so a significant part of what people do in the lay life was just, I didn't have to worry about any of that. Just show up to do my chores and help out communally where it was needed, for being a staff member. And then I think especially just the not having to drive and not having to make arrangements, as being a layperson to go into retreat, that it just freed up the mind tremendously to be able to just sit down and start paying attention to the instructions and putting them into practice. And so I think that that potential is here for all of us that are on retreat, that we do have duties, and it's kind of good to before you the day before you not wait till 1 hour before your retreat starts to think, oh yeah, I've got all these duties that I have to pass on, to kind of try to do that a couple days even in advance to kind of plan things out so that transition can be quite smooth. And so I was also kind of contemplating the last couple of days that I think there's quite a few of the community members who've actually not had that many opportunities to be on like a solitary retreat, or maybe even the guest who here maybe never had that opportunity. I don't think I actually other than living at the Arrow River as a layperson when I was just before coming to Abhayagiri, I lived with Ajahn Dhamma up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and even though it wasn't quote unquote a retreat, like my day there was I was like the kitchen manager, and I think we gathered at like 6 in the morning for morning puja, and then by 7:30 the puja was over, and then I just immediately would start cooking, and by about 9:30 we had the meal, and then by the time the kitchen was cleaned up, probably about 11, and I had the entire day free. It was like 20 hours was just completely open to me for practice, and so I got a sort of a sense of solitary retreat, even though there was that pretty intense period of puja and then cooking. But it wasn't until I came here that I actually really had a complete open period for 2 weeks, just completely set my own schedule. The only thing that would impinge on that would just be the meal or the Vinaya classes that we attend during those periods of time. But basically, on the days when there wasn't any Vinaya class, and many times when I was a junior monk, I would try to fast during that period too, like 8 or 10 day fasts. And so there were times where you can go 3 or 4 days without even having to see anybody, and just so it's quite unique having that opportunity. I mean, I remember it was probably not until my 4th, 5th year of doing these kinds of retreats that I remember at the end of the retreat thinking, well, that was the first year I think I really, really skillfully used the entire retreat. I didn't get into sloth and torpor, just annihilating myself in sleep, just not wanting to look at particular issues that were arising, or just feeling uncomfortable, feeling lonely, feeling sad, or whatever the emotions were coming up. And so it took quite a long time. So just one piece of encouragement to people that if you've never done a retreat or you've only done 1 or 2, that lots of different emotions and feelings can come up, and even after all these years, it's like I think it's kind of interesting the sort of the dichotomy that can happen. Like we really crave solitude maybe, and we're really looking forward to setting down our responsibilities and having this time, and so we really look forward to it. And then it's like sometimes it can almost be like the silence or the vacuum of responsibilities can almost feel like slamming into a wall, just when that silence sort of hits you and you get to your cabin and you realize, oh, I don't have anything to do for 23 more hours. It's just it can be kind of a jarring experience, and so I find it's like this duality of we really crave the silence, but then as soon as we get it, it's oftentimes what can come up is boredom or loneliness, sort of sloth and torpor overcomes us, or then say I think maybe while we're in a retreat we really start craving, oh, I wish I had more contact with people, even though it's like we're really looking forward to the solitude, but we kind of see should we miss the interactions with people? So we might, after a period of time of being alone and solitude, we kind of really crave being around people. And then sort of the duality of that is like then as soon as we're around people, then obviously there's tensions and difficulties, misunderstandings, and a lot of our suffering, a lot of our dukkha just comes from interacting with other people. Like, one of the monks next door at Mount Tabor, he was telling me that one of the guests was asking him what was the most difficult things about being a monk, and he said, well, there's really 3 things that are hard about being a monk. He says, one, it's my other brothers. That's the hardest one. That's number 1. Number 2 is my other brothers. And the third one is my other brothers. So, think he was missing the point. He should have been looking at himself. But it's like we can all understand that. We can all see that. But we're trying to be kind. We're trying to have responsibilities and duties, and trying to get things done. And we might say things a little quicker than we should, or it's not quite the care. And we can see that, oh yeah, somebody got hurt by what I said, and then even though the other person's hurt, then we feel bad about that, and just living with other people does cause tensions. So I just kind of mentioned this, that as you go into a solitary retreat, just to be aware that is a potential, that it probably will arise. Maybe not loneliness or sloth and torpor, but we have expectations, thoughts about what we'll do on the retreat, how we'll be, and then it'll probably always be other than that. No matter, it's okay to have expectations or thoughts, or to kind of think it through. One piece of advice that Ajahn Jotipalo Bhikkhu gives, I'm not sure if I read it or if he actually gave it to me directly. He's down at Wat Metta in Southern California, and he said that when you live in community, you should act like, or have the attitude that you're living in solitude. Just being circumspect about what we're putting into our mind. Like, are we being restrained in what we're doing externally? Are we, like, if you're living in solitude, just kind of imagining yourself like living in a log cabin in the forest someplace, and you're on retreat. You wouldn't be reading lots of magazines or spending lots of say frivolous time on a computer, or being engaged in conversations and things externally. So even when you're living in community, yeah, we do have duties, we do have responsibilities, but just being restrained and not trying to engage everybody all the time, or engaging ourselves in activities, and being helpful when it's needed, but not just being restrained. And then being restrained in speech, like when you're in community, just having the attitude that you're living in solitude. Speak when spoken to, but not necessarily having to be the first one to speak. Or I remember one winter retreat, I took on a practice for the first month, and I should have done it for the entire retreat, but I took on the practice of just that I wasn't going to speak unless I was spoken to, asked a question, and it was really profound, because I remember, just oftentimes when we break into speech, it's because we have a question, at least for myself, and I remember like sitting in the hall at breakfast time and having this real burning question, like, what time is, the meeting going to be this afternoon? And I was like, yeah, but you just made a vow that you're not going to speak until spoken to, so you can't ask that question. You can't break into speech. And sure enough, 2 minutes later, somebody would, Lumpur, what time are we meeting? What time is that meeting going to be? And I'm like, oh, well, I didn't have to ask the question, but it was answered. Or every single question that came up to my mind that I wanted to ask, somebody else ended up asking it. And I found that was really quite profound. One thing is kind of like, communal. If I have a particular thought about what's happening in the community, probably everybody else is having the same question. And so just really learning to trust that, like, I don't need to break into speech. And then the other thing, so it's like if you're living in community, kind of acting like, having the attitude that you live in solitude. The other extreme then is if you're living in solitude, take on the attitude that you're living in community. And so, like I was mentioning, like, what might happen, after a day or two is just, you wake up in the morning, you just naturally wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning maybe, because you're not maybe being quite as physical, and you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to get up at 2. It's I'll have 22 hours to stare at, and But just like take the attitude of like, what would you be doing if you were in community? So things like doing daily chanting, getting up and like what would you be doing if you were expected to come down for the morning pujas and the work period, and so it depends on how it works for you. Like Ajahn Jotipalo is always saying, try things and pay attention to the results. And so, like it might just work that you kind of have just a very, general kind of outline, like, as soon as I wake up, just naturally, or if by the alarm, I'll get up and do some walking meditation, do some stretching exercises, but then at 5 a.m. I'll do, light some candles and incense and do the morning chanting, or do some sutta chanting, or if you're learning the any particular suttas or the Patimokkha, then you take that as a time for doing chanting and meditate. Like, I always find it really fun, like when I have been on solitary retreat since being a monk, like remember like even when I was in Thailand, I was always trying to figure out what time Abhayagiri was doing their morning and evening puja, and I forget exactly what the times were, but it might be like 2 in the afternoon, and so I'd sometimes would just try to do the chanting and make sure I was either sitting or doing walking meditation at that same time, just sort of feeling like, I'm doing this, having that connection to the community. And also, Ajahn Siddhanta gave me advice one time, just to, especially if you're feeling, lonely or really bored, to take on a little activity, like just, half hour, even a half hour every day, just doing something like, washing your windows to your cabin, or just doing the things you would normally do to be caring for your dwelling, or you might do something a little extra, more like a lot of people had been at my kuti for a work period earlier this summer of clearing out dead branches and trees around my cabin, and so there were lots of little branches that were still on the ground. So until it reached 110 degrees, for the first few days of my retreat, I was able to just go out for just a half hour every morning and just gather these little sticks and carrying them over to where there was probably going to be a burn pile later. Just doing this little activities just to get me in my body, get me out of that sort of negative thinking. Kind of the chanting does the same thing. Like if you don't necessarily just have to do the chanting, when the community's doing it. But if you find yourself getting tired or bored and restless, then you can find some sort of practice like that, being of service to yourself by doing some little activities. You might even find, for yourself that having a real strict schedule, like, okay, I'm going to sit for 45 minutes, then walk for 45, sit for 45, walk for 45, and just see how that works. For me, that's a little bit too strict, and I like more of a kind of an open schedule. Like I'll just say, okay, well, the morning period, I'll do a half hour sort of sweeping or working, but then the rest will be just devoted to walking and sitting, and you're just finding what's a natural rhythm for yourself. Finding, here we sit, 45 minutes or an hour. Ajahn Sona, I remember him mentioning that, for some people, for the mind to quiet down, it actually takes a lot longer than an hour. It's like just when we're maybe just starting to kind of wear ourselves out with all the thinking and pondering and emotions that the bell rings and we get up and maybe if we had pushed it to an hour and a half or 2 hours, if you're flexible enough, maybe sitting 3 hours, maybe that's when it'll take that long for the mind to just drop into a deeper state. And so to experiment with that, kind of have this interest. It will be a time that's completely unstructured, and so you have that freedom to try that. Like I was again coming back to the chanting. Like I remember, I think it was Ajahn Sundara was telling me, real early days. I think it was Ananda Maitreya, when he was visiting Amaravati, would do like the Itipiso chant, but it was like every syllable of the chant was like one inhalation, then one exhalation would be the next syllable. So it was like it, tip, be, so, ba, ga, wa. Just trying something like that, like really doing the chanting. It's completely different than maybe the way we do it down here, and doing something really slow, like even slower than what I was doing. It just really, feeling the vibration in your throat, in your entire body, just as you're chanting one syllable. Getting interested in that. I could really, just paying attention to that. It sounds fun to me. Actually, I can feel that resonating through my whole body. It can be quite fun. And or like our dear friend Tankovilo, he would do the 108 Itipiso chants. It takes about 3 hours to do that, and I remember we've done that a couple times as a community, and you end up chanting that like 3 times faster than we normally chant. So, like if the mind's really overly active, then maybe doing the chanting really slow and feeling it in your body, maybe that will help calm the mind. Or if you're really tired and not wanting to put forth effort, then doing something like chanting really fast and see how that works. So you have all these sort of opportunities to play around, to have. I really look at it as a time of like having fun, actually, learning what it is about meditation, about being in solitude that can be intriguing to us. I was also thinking of mentioning that I think the first 3 days of the retreat are really critical, really quite important. One of the teachers at IMS, I remember once saying that was kind of talking about like the weekend retreats, or if it's like a retreat that has like a holiday on a Monday or something, like doing a 2 or 3 day weekend retreat. That he was saying that a lot of people he knew like used to say like they didn't want to go to those kind of the weekend retreats because they wouldn't get concentrated. It wasn't enough time for them to get concentrated, and he was kind of like, well, they're missing the point, because it's like kind of one of the beauties of sort of like that is that as soon as you sit down and like on a short retreat like that, or if you do have a 2-week retreat, I think like whatever mind states, as soon as you do get into your kuti, or as soon as you do start that retreat, and there's this real open space in front of you, it's like whatever the thoughts, whatever the emotions, whatever arises for us, that actually is our life. That's it didn't happen. Those things didn't come up just because you're on retreat. It's like that's always been there. That's always there, and you're finally have set everything down, kind of have let go, and you're seeing it more clearly. So like this, if it's loneliness that arises, or aversion arises, or wanting to annihilate ourselves by going to sleep, or wanting to not look at the silence by starting a work period for like say 15, 20 minutes at your cabin because I just suggested it, but then you end up working all day. Basically it's because you didn't want to. You're afraid of the silence, or afraid of being with ourselves. You can see that. Oh, look at that. That's how I'm living my life. And so I think the first few days of just really taking an interest and paying attention, and wanting to know what is my mind like. one of the teachers at IMS, I think it was Larry Rosenberg, he used to start his retreats with, he says, if you want to know what your mind is like, go open the door to your room right now. So that's what your life is, that's what your mind is like, that's what your life is like. So like, first day of the retreat, so like if you're real busy and you're in a hurry and you just get to the retreat and you just sort of open your suitcase and just throw things on the floor, well, that's probably what your life is like, if that's the attitude that you took when you opened, got into your retreat. Or like if like Ajahn Jotipalo, whenever I've traveled with him, he totally amazed. Like I'll pack my suitcase really nice and neat and everything's folded, and then I get to wherever we've gone and just the jostling of the travel and stuff like that, things have moved around, things aren't quite folded as nice, but I open Ajahn Jotipalo's suitcase to get things out for him. Everything is perfectly folded still. It hasn't even moved yet. It's like oh, that's what it's like to have a really solid mind. Like your stuff doesn't even move and being thrown around in a suitcase. And so so you can see that, like if you have a mind that's well composed and uncluttered and enjoys unclutteredness, then like those people that had that kind of mind, like when they got to the retreat, when they unpacked their suitcases, they would have put things on shelves, they would have made their bed, they would have put their shoes in a nice orderly place. It's like so tomorrow morning at 3:30, when you get back to your cabin, if you want to know what your life is like, just open your door and look. That'll be a real great indication of how we live our lives. My friend John from Minnesota was telling me that there was a man who was the groundskeeper at Common Ground, and they have a little retreat center where people can go and do solitary retreats. And he was in a tragic accident where I think he was trying to pull a stump out with a tractor, and he told me the details, which I can't totally remember, but anyway, the tractor fell over and crushed him, and he died instantly in this accident. It was a couple days before somebody came out to the retreat center and found him. But they said it was totally amazing when they went to his room. Everything was immaculate. Like his checkbook was perfectly balanced. It was, it was like everything was perfectly in its place. All the socks were perfectly lined up with each other, and he said everything, completely everything was completely in order. All his banking information was there, all the phone numbers of all the insurance companies and anybody that you would need to contact in an emergency or if someone's died. He had it all laid out. John said it was almost as if he knew he was going to die that day and wanted to make it easier for people. And for those people that knew, his name was Denny. And if you met him in life, you'd think the same thing. You'd think, here's somebody who's really well composed, well trained, and probably has a very, very quite peaceful mind. And so I think so far, like only 3 of us have had the opportunity to be on the solitary retreat. So the rest of the community will have that opportunity. And so I just really encourage people to just really think of this as a really precious time that most people in the world are never have that opportunity, that freedom to spend 2 weeks in solitude. People are too busy raising families and working, or just even trying to find food to eat. That we have this opportunity, and we have these teachings, and there's a lot more I could say about sort of solitary retreat, but I think this is enough for tonight. I just want to kind of hopefully inspire people to really take advantage of it. And even though it's like of talking about this context of people being on 2-week retreat, but it applies to everyday life. It's like, again, like how at one point I was saying that how we do live our lives. It's like when we enter into the retreat, we see that more clearly. So that it can be kind of an inspiration to live our lives more skillfully, more in a wholesome way. So then when we do get that opportunity to be on retreat, then it's our lives are happy because we are taking care of ourselves. And then when we sit down in the evening meditation and for puja, it's I think one thing Ajahn Jeff also says, it's like like if it does I guess an experiment with sitting for longer hours if the mind doesn't concentrate, and if you do then get a taste of that, or you are able to get into a concentrated state of mind, then you pay attention to what it was that allowed that to happen, how we were able to do that. And then Ajahn Jeff's always pointing out that a lot of meditation, if you're able to do that, is just to keep repeating that. See if you can repeat that. But then it's to become more efficient. And it's like, I can't remember if it was 1 or 3, but I think I heard Ajahn Pasna once saying that like Ajahn Chah was just so efficient with meditation that he could sit down on a cushion, and one inhalation and one exhalation, and he could be in jhana. It was either 1 or 3. But if we find that we are able to do that, and it takes a while, it takes more effort, it takes 2 or 3 hours, don't worry about that. That's great that it happened, and we have that ability. But then just learn to be more efficient with it. Learn what we can let go of, and make that transition happen sooner. And so the same thing, like when we come into evening pujas, if we lived a very skillful day, we come in, we don't have the remorse and regret and worries. It's going to be much more likely that we're going to have a maybe not concentrated meditation, but at least it can be enjoyable. So I'll leave that for our reflection this evening.